Hello. Can Good afternoon, early good evening, everybody. I think so. First of all, I would like to apologize that we are running a little bit late, and because this session was supposed to start at 2:30, and I'm not sure now what the time is, probably about 30 minutes. And first of all, my name is Shireen Xavier. I'm from Sri Lanka. I'm also coming from the civil society, and we do quite a lot of work on access to information. Before introducing myself, today's, I think we all know the theme, today's theme, but this particular session, we are going to discuss about the best practices and outcomes in integrating transparency in public budgeting and expenditure. So I think at the end of the day, when we're talking about access to information, or right to information, it's all about how the money is spent, public money is spent. And this is the session, I think, going to get into the nitty-gritties of it. And before introducing the panelists, I also want to just throw in one point. I think overall in the world, all countries spend about 15 trillion US dollars in in contracting. So we are spending why, open contracting and transparency is important. When you speak in dollars or on financial value, it actually tells us $15 trillion, and that's the reason. So that being said, let me sort of introduce the panelists today. We have Ivy Ong, she's right here. She's the acting regional lead of Asia Pacific for Open Government Partnership. And we have Adne Lassoud. He's the president of Access to Information Authority of Tunisia. I also want to sort of ask for your apology in case if I pronounce any of your names incorrectly. Lassoud, okay. And then we have, she doesn't need any introduction. Our commissioner, Inay, the Mexican commissioner, Blanca Cadena, and she will also be she's another panelist. And then we have Lakai Dill. She's the investigation officer, Information Commissioner's Office, Bermuda. And we have our rapporteur, Tiago Frates. He is going to be the rapporteur. He's also here, and I think his job is the most important one, how it's all going to sort of, put out and after us leaving from here. So that being, me giving a small introduction of the panelists, what are we going to, speak about? Why we are kind of chose this topic is something that I'm going to, inform you all or discuss with you all. Point number one is discuss the value of open contracting and transparency in the public expenditures and how this contribute to the increased public trust, quality of government services, wise public expenditure, and improved competition, among others. Number two, share the current initiatives of your office related to open contracting, emphasize on the biggest results, outcomes so far for the public or the citizens. Third is share the factors that hinder the implementation of open contracting policies, realization of open contracting advocacy. So that's basically the panelists will cover. And also for the panelists, I think the organizers have given 3 questions, and all of you all have chosen the questions. So I will let the audience also I'll inform them about those 3 questions, but I will also expect the panelists, when you all are making the presentation, if you can let us know which are the questions that you're addressing. So the questions are, the first question is, explain the concept of open contracting and transparency in the public expenditure and explain its value. Remarkable regional global practices. And I think Ivy and the commissioner from Tunisia are going to address that question. And then this number 2 is share the current initiatives of your office related to open contracting. What are some of the biggest results, outcomes so far for public citizens. And I think it's Blanca, you're going to, the commissioner, Mexican commissioner, she's going to address that. And the third one, what are the factors that hinder the implementation of open contracting policies, realization of open contracting advocacy, and how they have been overcome? I think that's very important, and I think yes, Lakai will be addressing that question. So without further me going into it, I will ask the panelist and to say, do your presentation. Evie Gale, you're going to go first. Thank you.
Let me check if you could hear me first. All right, wonderful. Good afternoon, magandang hapon, as we say in Filipino. I'll start first with the first question, which is explaining the concept of open contracting and providing you with a few stories from different parts of the world. I think one thing that's clear, and we've already mentioned it, right? Every year, governments spend minimum over 13 trillion US dollars. That's around 12% of global gross domestic product. So you can imagine how huge that amount is. And various studies have shown that 10 to 25% of the value of a government contract can be lost to corruption. 10 to 25%. Just think about that. So public procurement represents up to 20% of the world economy, yet transparency is quite weak in this area. So if we think about it, the importance of applying open government principles, by that I mean through open contracting and public monitoring and reporting mechanisms, can help save money, fight corruption, and expand competition. Let me define open contracting so that we're all on the same page. Open contracting is the practice of producing and using open, accessible, and timely information on public contracts. So reforms in this area seek to engage stakeholders across sectors to mitigate corruption and deliver value for money on government procurement and licensing. So when contracting data is open, it enables effective oversight of government services by revealing who is getting paid, how much to deliver what, as well as how they were selected and whether they delivered on time and with quality. So what do we get out of doing such a thing, right? Open contracting, if done right, saves money, increases competition, strengthens supply chains, reduces risks, and encourages greater inclusion. So a few stories so that we could kind of put meat in the bones, and maybe the question is, how is this even possible, and can we get anything out of opening up public procurement information proactively? In Ukraine, OGP has helped advance open contracting, and then there is an active civil society in the country. Government, civil society groups, and private sector have banded together to implement an e-procurement system called Prozoro and a complementary citizen monitoring platform called Dozoro, opening up the procurement process to public scrutiny and participation. Prozoro e-procurement system, which published tons of new data on everything from the number of bidders on tenders to the phone numbers of procurement officers, saved the government an estimated $1 billion US within the first 2 years of its launch. 80% of businesses who were surveyed reported reduced corruption from the use of the platform. And the number of new businesses, including small and medium enterprises, bidding for contracts increased by 50%. After 3 years, Dozoro, the citizen monitoring platform, uncovered violations in over 30,000 tenders with an estimated value of $4 billion. So if you just compute how much money the Ukrainian government has saved by opening up proactively and also providing mechanisms for citizens to report, to have that discussion with government, right? And you combine that too, and you make sure that the feedback loop is closed and continues to go through, you get this amount. In some cases, sanctions and criminal charges were issued. So it's amazing to note also that Dozoro, that monitoring platform, they have more than 100,000 people using that monitoring system alone. They've also used this in their extractive sector. So they've gone beyond just public services, but also in extractive transparency. Another example is from Indonesia, quite closer to the Philippines. They're one of the 8 founding governments of OGP and also part of the OGP Steering Committee. The Indonesia Corruption Watch also closely worked with LKPP, or the National Procurement Agency of Indonesia, to promote disclosure of procurement information. So ICW created a procurement monitoring tool called opentender.net. So it displays all public procurement and their potential fraud score. The higher the score, the higher the potential for fraud. This tool also helps the inspectorate supervise procurement activities. So there's a give and take, and as I could say, there's a close relationship actually between LKPP and ICW and several other civil society in this work that they're doing. One of the things that they actually just did is called the Monitoring Marathon, or the Monithon, where they got people to monitor public procurement in 24 hours and report the finding in LKPP's complaint handling mechanism. And in the course of that event, they found something that actually went viral on Indonesian social media. So government had to explain the procurement of curtains for the official houses of members of the House of Representatives, which were valued at $2.98 million. So it was also an interesting exercise, right, of making sure that more people knew about open information, because outreach is important. One thing is disclosing, another thing is people knowing that the information is out there, and the other thing is, again, use of data, which they did together. The last story I have is from the state of Kaduna in Nigeria. This is what they call the Kaduna Citizen Feedback App, which is housed under the Eyes and Ears project. So it's a citizen-led budget monitoring initiative. And part of the initiative is government disclosing the geolocation of publicly funded projects, and citizens are able to upload photos and feedback on these projects, and they go directly to the governor's office and state legislature. The initiative is really empowering citizens and by giving them a concrete tool to become the eyes and ears of government, oversee public spending in different government projects, including health and education infrastructure, provision of water, among others. So I'll stop there and I'll just join the other chat on hindering factors. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. And if I may ask the Tunisian commissioner right now for the second question.
Merci. D'accord, merci. Merci beaucoup. Merci, je suis très honoré, très ravi aussi de prendre part à cette conférence et de participer en tant que panéliste à cette réunion. J'en suis très ravi. Je pense que pour parler au sujet de ce panel, je pense qu'il est unanime à dire que la passation des marchés publics
the open government
est considérée parmi les
is considered as the most empowered tool. We can supervise and control the transparency and regularity of the administrative acts, of course, those documents and report that would be provided by public administrations. To start, I would like to focus to highlight the importance of transparency on this report. The argument with the transparency, in the name of transparency, is omnipresent. Currently, the transparency is shown as a value that is very timely in this field, in this the government open contracting, that is to say, the contract that are made public with the state, the partnership contract with the state, the procurement in all fields. The principle that relay on this with the proactive disclosure of this information of the public contracting, it's one of the major components of sine qua non transparency of information, and then render this information accessible to people. To arrive to a higher transparency in the field of the public contracting. And it's also called the direct disclosure for those who are looking for having a direct access to those data provided by the government. With the administrative procedures. As you know, the disclosure anticipated and of the information and to respond to the needs of the public. It's one of most important element of an open government, and it's, to my opinion, it's essential for the transparency to ensure public debate more informed, and it is a key. And I'm talking about the government contracting, and then you can see the logical link between the government open in the field of transparency, and then to be liable for the public institution, they have to commit in a proactive manner on the public expenditure. It is will shed some light on the decision that would be taken with the expenditures decisions, and to entrust with the public funds, especially into the government contracting. The government can only be open if those information is rendered public and those decisions are transparent. You do have to have as an objective prior to the needs of the public. All population, in my opinion, have the right to know what the government is doing with the money, and they expect that this data be easily accessible online. So a proactive disclosure may reduce the task of under the law of liberty and access to information. The transparency, proactive, in my opinion, with four main factors. First, to inform the public on the laws and decisions, and the right of the public to be informed and to know their rights, and then clear and precise. And the second would be the request of the public for the information to hold the government liable during the elections and after the election. And the third one would be the request of information to be part of the decision making. And the fourth forth, the providing to the public information needed. And this is, over the last 10 years, has been increased over the last 10 years with the Internet. So, le gouvernement électronique, très rapidement sur la loi tunisienne,
portant sur le droit d'accès à l'information, a prévu sous ce rapport, tout en rappelant que le droit d'accès à l'information en Tunisie est un droit constitutionnel.
In Tunisia, it's a constitutional right of the public of Tunisia. The state guarantees the law. The right of access, and law in Tunisia gave a full chapter on the public structure for being a proactive disclosure, including the government contracting. Under this text of law, they have to render public the general public in using format to use the law in non-exhaustive 6, 7, and 8 of the law, the Tunisian law, with practical experience in Tunisia. We estimate that the dynamic is needed in different countries so that they could accomplish their task in the best of times, adequately, to answer, to reply to the request of the public in proper time. I will end my speech with saying that greater attention, a greater focus should be put to the implementation of the program of transparency and the registers of the requests and replies as a main source of public reports produced by the administration of the governments.
Thank you, Commissioner Lassoud. For the first question, I think both Evie Gale and Commissioner Lassoud had probably touched upon sort of like the concept and then the global practices. I mean, you talked about Nigeria, Indonesia, and Ukraine. So now we'll go into the second question, like, Commissioner Blanca, that the current initiative of your office. So we are just like, going to be a bit more specific with the second question, and then if you can give us some results and outcomes. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes. Bueno, pues en primer lugar yo quisiera darles un saludo del comisionado Adrián Alcalá, quien participaría en este panel, pero bueno, con la representación del Pleno del INAI, estaría teniendo esta participación, hablándoles específicamente de algunos ejemplos de abierta
of the open infrastructure that was done in Mexico. And as you well know, the open infrastructure is an initiative that's been pushed by Institute of Transparency of Mexico together with Commissioner Adrián Alcalá, and we will share what are the objectives, what's being done, and the output and outcome, and that might be applicable in your countries. We're just sharing our experience for your consideration, and it's up to you to see how. In Mexico, the projects, infrastructure are very important, but also are a source of debate. The law on transparency in Mexico has provisions, specific provisions that are to make public works more transparent. But there are also some challenges. For example, in the case 2021, 2023, there were 2 decrees that were damaging or hindrance to because they were speaking about reservation or reduction of information. So we went to the Supreme Court. In the first case, there is the INAI was said we won the case. They said that decree was unconstitutional. But the second one, sadly, is still in the process of being settled by the Supreme Court. So we won one, and the other one's still on the air. In Mexico, there are also flagship cases wherein it's been created here, where corruption has been so visible. Some of which are Odebrecht, that has construction with companies of many countries of the region, and which has to do with irregularities and payments and illegal payments, or the Paso Express in a certain stretch of the highway that collapsed, and that cost the life of some persons. Because all of that, opaqueness has been a challenge. So we have to have a sustained effort to fight, because there is not enough transparency, and three problems can arise. This could be the projects done by the government, and not necessarily maybe they were a project which is not needed by the society. Second are the costs entailed that could be higher than the market prices bid. They're overpriced because there is not enough competition. And a third, with the quality of the projects that are not far from optimal. To combat this, INAI, together with social civil NGOs, we set two standards international. One that has to do with the open data initiative, and the other one on the information open competition, but particularly for infrastructure. Both standards are the base Open Data Initiative. Let me share with you, has three objectives. One, to make public information in open formats on the projects. The second, that is to promote the participation of the citizenry, and thus increasing the monitoring and on how public money is spent. So we create a network which is open data network that is multi-factor, wherein we have a egalitarian participation of the private, public, and social sectors. And the third is to promote the use of open data to increase the efficiency of the public management and governance, and to improve the quality and the expense of those hired services. Now, how do we do that? What is the contribution of that project? Well, to put this, we started with a pilot project which were presented very recently. I think it was in June, just a few days back. Then we have a system of data gathering and a visualizer and an open software and an open code, so that the organizations that were stakeholders could access it. But anybody, although
o bien las beneficiarias, pudieran dar seguimiento a los proyectos de obra de su comunidad. En ese sentido, un ejemplo de las prácticas desarrolladas en el marco de ese proyecto es el llamado caso de Vista Hermosa en el estado de Michoacán, que es una comunidad en México de más de 20,000 personas. En ese caso se decidió transparentar el colector poniente, que en términos generales es un conducto subterráneo en el cual vierten las alcantarillas.
And the sewerage is funneled. In Vista Hermosa, there were a number of organizations of social civil society and of the beneficiaries, as you can see on pictures, where they exemplify what was done, because they paid an ocular visit to verify the information that was published in the platform. So they were contrasting what was being said to what was happening on the ground. Now, this is just one example, because this project included three institutions, agencies, with the support of 55 persons or organizations specialized, with a coverage of 9 states in Mexico. In that project, we also had the participation of 43 public works that were bidded out, that amounted to 300 million US dollars and a beneficiary population of more than 1,500,000 persons. In this regard, that is how we see the transparency in the bidding and the contract and entering into contracts strengthens participation of civil society and thus democracy. In this first observation, the examples I want to share with you, and I could put it available to all of you. If I can elaborate further, then you have me at your disposal. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Blanca.
Merci, commissaire.
So the next question.
Notre prochaine question. Je demande à chacun de nos panélistes si quelqu'un voudrait contribuer à cette question avant de passer à la prochaine.
No. Okay. So shall we go to the third?
Nous pourrons.
The third question is, what are the factors that hinder the implementation of open contracting policies, realization of open contracting advocacy, and how have they been overcome? And for this question, I think the first person who is probably going to respond to this question is Lagai Dill, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm from Bermuda, so let me just briefly introduce you to my corner of the globe. So we are the access to information regulator for the public sector only. So we do not have oversight over privacy rights or data protection or other maladministration complaints like other hybrid ombudsman or information regulators do, just the public sector information, access to information. To sum us up, in Bermuda, we are a very small jurisdiction, 60,000 people population, a very small office. We have 7 staff members. Our regime is newer, and we have quite an advanced legislation. So we are 13 years old in terms of the public access to information law, and it's been in effect now for 8 years. So our law creates 2 pathways for the public to access public procurement data. So the first pathway is really the proactive publication. This is where the government, every public authority is required to put out there in the public domain certain public spending information and certain information about public contracts. So our government has issued a procurement practice code that was last updated in 2020 as a guideline for public authorities. We also have 2 web portals. So one of the web portals hosts procurement notices, and then the other one hosts basic contracting information once a contract is awarded. The second pathway that members of the public in Bermuda can access public procurement data is through a specific request. So either an ATI request, we call it PATI because of public access to information, they can make a PATI request. So this is where the citizen gets to drive the information that is released and put out there in the public domain. In the first pathway, it's very government-driven. The government decides what information they want to put out there about public procurement. The second pathway allows the citizen to clarify for the government, hey, this is the type of information that we're actually interested in gaining. So I'm going to touch briefly on some low-hanging fruit roadblocks on these 2 pathways from my perspective as an investigator in a public access to information regulator's office. So let's start with the second pathway, which is the specific PATI request. So that is a critical tool that complements open public contracting advocacy. So this is really where the tension lies between what the government's drive to share its information and the public's right to say exactly what information they are interested in getting to know about public procurement. So this is especially when it's not something that the government finds that it's necessary or useful to go beyond its walls. An example, an open contracting standard might require that in a public contract, the name of the parent company or the group company gets published. But a member of the public might be interested more to know who this specific company subsidiary is that was awarded that contract and who the beneficial owners of that specific company are. So that's where you get the balance of the party request, which helps to push the boundaries, push government's boundaries on what information they're actually putting out there in terms of public procurement. So when someone asks for public information and the authority decides to not release it because they found that that information is exempt, my job as an investigator is to help assess whether the authority's reasoning was correct and that the information was properly withheld. Because once third-party information checks have been done, the assumption is that the information is going to be released, not withheld. So in my role on this second pathway, in terms of the individual driving the request for information about public procurement, what sorts of things do I see as that put the brakes on a public authority's willingness to disclose information about a public contract? So the first area that comes to mind for me is the people element. There will be unspoken perceptions at the individual level of public officers. And these unspoken perceptions will drive those public officers thinking about what the requester's information needs actually are. It will drive their choices about what actions they take or decide not to take, and ultimately will drive their decisions on whether to release information or not. And those uninterrogated perceptions, those unspoken perceptions, can lead public officers to think that, for instance, disclosing information for the sake of information can do more harm than good, because, putting myself in a public officer's position, they might think that the public usually doesn't have the right knowledge or the right context to understand or to process the information that they say that they want through a party request. Another perception can lead public officers to mistake embarrassment as a valid reason to not disclose information when a member of the public has asked for it. Or a third example is distrusting the requester's intention by assuming the information, if the authority were to release it, would be used only to malign the government, no matter the good intentions and the good works of those public officials. And that the public would not use the information to foster citizen engagement and meaningful public scrutiny, as open contracting advocacy assumes the public is always interested in. So those sorts of perceptions, they create limits. They create real limits in how willing a public authority is to release information. Another area concerns third-party rights. So while open and timely disclosures must balance appropriate protections for third-party rights, public officers may have a wrong understanding about what sorts of commercial, confidential, and personal information really is exempt from being released to the world. So this could lead to an over-disclosure of information or an under-disclosure in the first instance, meaning in the first instance, when the public authority is making its first decision to not release information when someone asks for it. An over-disclosure of a third party's information can create risks, yes. And in this sense, the public officer leaning on the side of caution may be wise, because an over-disclosure may expose the government to litigation. Usefully, though, an over-disclosure could make third parties more conscious of the power to disclose under the ATI process as they interact with the government in the future. Now, an under-disclosure is usually what triggers the commissioner's independent review process. And an additional hindrance that's raised through the independent review process relates to the timeliness, actually, in our office's caseload progression, because as many public accountability offices throughout the world, small, large, medium, large, new, old, we experience backlogs. And a backlog of cases can mean delayed fulfillment of the public's access to public contracting records. So another area in relation to these third-party rights is that public officers may not clearly understand how the ATI request process relates to the procurement process in a general way, or more specifically, the disclosure or not disclosure part embedded in a procurement process. So for instance, they might assume that disclosure or non-disclosure procedure embedded in the procurement process must take precedence over the ATI framework. An authority may think that simply because a bid process is ongoing, absolutely no contract-related information could be lawfully disclosed to a requester via PADI request, and that is simply not the case. So a third area that may hinder a public authority's willingness to disclose information concerns lawsuits. You know, adverse court action about public contracts can make public authorities trigger happy on withholding information. And authorities, unfortunately, may rely on blanket legal advice, which rather unhelpfully guides them to thinking that any disclosure could cause harm, but without taking a critical look at whether the actual information at issue could result in the harms that they envision. And especially when the parties settle, no public court judgment may mean the public is never privy to certain procurement information through that first pathway, which means the individual member of the public who is requesting information is driving the public's access to information about the outcome of that particular contract. So as a final comment about this second pathway, I note that as unsatisfying as it can be for me personally as an investigator, the public access to information regulators' role is not to verify that the records gathered for disclosure represent complete, comprehensive, and high-quality data about public contracts. On that pathway of doing an independent review of the outcome of a PADI request, we must be disciplined to basically not care about the quality of information within the records when enforcing the right of the requester to get access to the information that they ask for, or know in clear terms why they won't get access to it.
Yeah, thank you, Lakai.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That wraps it up.
Yes, because I've been asked by the organizers that we only have short time, but it's quite interesting that the point, like the biggest takeaway from your presentation is like, you know, the under disclosure and over disclosure, and how do you strike a balance and who strikes the balance. I mean, I wish we had more time to discuss and to hear from all of you all. And Commissioner Lassoud, you also wanted to say something in this, or would you like to add anything on that? Because this third question also you wanted to respond. Okay. So in that note, I would like to also, I would like to thank all the panelists for your presentation. And if anyone want to, like, you know, just 1 minute, if you can conclude, each one take about, like, you know, 30 seconds to 1 minute to conclude, like, you know, at least one question overall, because it is all interrelated, so you all heard the overall one, and then if you want to say something, like, you know, please do.
Si me permiten, yo solamente quisiera cerrar mi participación refiriendo que uno de los retos
this participation by telling you about the challenges and the integration to the participation in the citizenship. That what I was saying about the projects of open contracting, we have to look at things not only the authority that has to have collaboration that is institutionalized, but then the organisms, the other entities should also, like in Mexico, we don't have only a national organism, but we also have guarantor organisms, entities. we want to have a national policy on open contracting. It is an initiative that we think will be very important, and it's in the last phase of construction, and many people are involved. The guaranteed organisms, if they have already manifested their interests, and so it's to give to the public the outcome of open contracting in whatever place in the world that maybe this can also be of use. And it is important that that data be made accessible for everybody, and that they also identify sponsors, tendencies, or even say if there are cases of corruption, and also to propose new solutions. Also, if you would like to consult, there are two websites that can also give you a little bit more of data that we would like to give through INAI. One is infraestructuraabierta.com, and another one is Abramos Mexico. That means that is openmexico.com. Thank you very much.
And yes, Commissioner Lasso.
D'accord, je voudrais juste ajouter.
I would just like to add and insist on the fact that the national standard in the field of transparency and access to information and documents provided by the state to the public administrations, it should be provided by international bodies, and they show clearly that apart from having this advantage for the public bodies, transparency is a main part of access to information. It's possible to identify a minimum rule for proactive disclosure. The practical implementation of proactive disclosure should be done in a way in which information should be structured, organized, edited, when they are disclosed, as well as setting in place the necessary measures to deploy programs or campaigns, information campaigns, to ensure conformity. And these measures will lead to recommendations. And information should be given in a way that is easy to find, free, or cheap, and proactive disclosure should be easily accessible, progressive, and should be promoted by the government, and should be properly applied. I would also just add, to finish, to conclude, I would like to say that greater attention should be given to the periodic updating of transparency and the register of requests, of FOIA requests for the public. Budgetary expenditures, procurement, audits should be made available, and this will increase the confidence and responsibility towards the public. This is my advice as a commissioner of Tunisia. problems remain that make it difficult to attain this objective and does not meet the demands of the public, this obligation becomes, this is our responsibility. It's a sine qua non condition for the proactive disclosure. And with regards to procurement, information regarding all the transparency programs should remain a main source of information for the public, as well as the accountability towards public. Thank you very much.
And Lakai Dil, I'm sorry I cut you before, but you can add that as well in your concluding remark. Yes, Lakai, please.
Sure. I'll just briefly say that in terms of overcoming hindrances, I spent my 7 minutes talking about public officers, having all of these misperceptions and misunderstandings. But really, how to overcome it is really having meaningful, direct engagement with public officers, recognizing that it is people, not necessarily institutions, but people who have thoughts and individual behaviors that are making a majority of these decisions on releasing public procurement data. So as a regulator, having meaningful, on the one hand, informal interventions so that public officers aren't having to make decisions, the best decisions that they possibly can make, but in the dark. And then on the other hand, doing formal, practical, practice-based trainings. So those informal interventions are equally as important as doing the sort of more formal guidances and practice-oriented interventions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, now the final comment. I'll give to Miguel. Please go ahead.
No pressure. No, really just lucky to hear all of your experiences and all the good work and sometimes lonely work that all of you, not only the panelists, but all of you here are doing and recognizing that. Beyond the importance of proactive disclosure, beyond open data, we've talked about that and we didn't even go into technicalities, right? The importance of common identifiers, the importance of disclosure of open contracting across all the phases of open contracting, which is how you ensure that people are able to monitor, not only government, not only civil society, but also business, are able to track what is happening. One thing I would emphasize, two things I would emphasize. One is the importance of systemically including participation of civil society in evaluation and oversight. And that systemic inclusion will also enable more eyes and more wisdom and also bringing in civil society with government and saying, hey, there is collaboration here. There is a space for us to genuinely have a dialogue on what is happening. How are we using the money? And is it going to where it's needed? Right? And really being partners in development for your respective countries. The last thing I will say is the importance of usability. I heard from Lakai earlier on, the difficulty of over disclosure, under disclosure. How do you ensure that at the end of the day, the disclosed information and data is used? I think that's for the past 5 to 7 years in this space, in open data, in the open data space, that has always been the challenge from developed to developing countries. And the one thing that I've seen and several folks have been studying is the idea of open data intermediaries. And I think intermediation, bringing together government, civil society, grassroots organizations, the data science and tech community, and bringing those forces together with their different capacities and skills, whether it be connecting with government or having the data skills to really just mine information, and also having, you know, from grassroots perspective, having the perspective of people who are about to use the information, right? The ones who are asking for information. If you bring all of those intermediaries together, then you develop the value, and you get the value of opening up information. You're not just having, you know, graveyards of PDFs and websites that are no longer being used because people actually don't know that it actually exists, right? So you bring all of these intermediaries together and hopefully benefit from that inclusion of more civil society citizens and, you know, regular SMEs in the process. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and then we are running out of time. So I think, I mean, each one of you all sort of collated what other person had said as well. But for me as a moderator, that the takeaway is like how do you, I mean, there has to be monitoring tools, and then about this open contracting, and then, for example, I mean, you know, if you can reduce 25% of corruption, I mean, that is a big win for, like, you know, the work that we have done, or for this access to information law, because of that only, that you are able to reduce, at least even in some countries, 20 to 25%. And like, you know, being a moderator, I only have to collate, but I just want to leave the whole session with one small anecdote. We talk about millions and billions of dollars, but at the end of the day, I want to give an example in Sri Lanka, where in a village, because of this open contracting, the village members got like the name of the contractor who was going to build that little village road, and they knew this contractor is corrupt. So what they did was, like, while they were doing, they wanted the sample, like, you know, what the soil, like, the sand sample, the cement sample, and by doing that, they were able to see, like, you know, that the road was contracted. So I'm saying, like, in the macro level, the micro level where they had to travel on the same road and all of that every single day, how it impacts. I mean, so that's why it's important, and that is why it's important to have this kind of monitoring tools where you have what you have in Indonesia, what you have in Ukraine, what you are developing in Nigeria, and then for INAI, I mean, you know, you just started in June, so this kind of, so, I mean, I leave you. Thank you very much, the panelists. I mean, so I wish we had more discussion. I think they all wanted to have lots of questions, but maybe we're going to be here tomorrow as well. You can, like, you know, find a panelist and ask the questions that you all have, whether it's good or bad. I mean, in our lunch table discussion we had, I mean, you know, how open we should be and all of that. I think these questions, it's legitimate questions, and we need to ask, and thank you very much. Have a good evening. Thank you.